I just want to thank you all for taking the time out of your regular scheduled workday to be here to receive this training. I want to thank our partners, the First Seventh-day Adventist Church here in Frederick, and as well as all of you for being here. I'm Sergeant Justin Thomas. I'm with the Frederick Police Department. I have been with the department 11 years. I transferred from Prince George's County Police Department, where I served 5 years. I have taken active roles in the department in our SWAT team, which I started in 2013 and coincidentally began teaching the active shooter program to the officers at the academy level and then in service. Shortly after that, we started teaching the civilian response to active shooter events, which is what you're here to listen to today. So approximately 10 years I've been teaching this curriculum, and I truly believe that it is very important for everyone to understand and to unfortunately learn from the circumstances that have happened in our country and around the world when it comes to active attack events. And I do want you to pay attention because these are core principles you can apply throughout your everyday lives and into your workplaces. And I'll turn it over to Vince to introduce himself.
Good morning, I'm Sergeant Vincent Brown, Frederick Police Department. I've been with the department for 17 years now. I came down here from the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where I served 8 years as a deputy game warden. I have a background in fire, EMS, been a firefighter for actually 30 years this month. Sergeant Thomas is more of our tactical guy and instructor. I come over on the medical side. I'm in charge of our LEMIC program at our academy and in services, which teaches the medical aspect and then rolls into more of the tactics or the active shooter side. So we'll bounce back and forth through this. As Sergeant Thomas said, the civilian response to active shooter engagements, we used to be able to say, yeah, I remember when this happened, and we haven't had that in a while. And unfortunately, in today's age, it's more and more every time you turn on the news, something somewhere, or you Google active shooter, somewhere in the United States, there's an active shooter incident probably going on right now. So this is stuff that we want to get out to you to help you and help you help us when we get to that point. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate the turnout, and we'll get moving.
As we go into the slideshow, there's going to be a lot of what I would consider just emotionally exciting topics. They're going to cause you to have a lot of feelings and a lot of stress at times. Understand that this is a very touchy subject. When we're talking about active attack events, it is taboo. It is hard to discuss, but that's the importance of this training. We are here to generate conversations between you and the administration at your workplace in order to examine your emergency plans, to examine your actionable options when and if this happens to you in that location. So you'll hear us talking. We won't mention the names of the attackers. We don't give them credit. It will even address that toward the end of the presentation. So if we're talking about people, we're talking about the survivors. We're talking about the people who made an impact on the event in a positive way. And just to give the disclaimer, there will be some videos that are going to be a little hard to watch. But if you need to, please, you may step out or do what you need to and then rejoin us when you're ready. All right. So active attack events are what we're talking about today. And the FBI really started pushing out active shooter training post-Columbine, in which we looked at an individual going into a facility, in this case a school, two individuals, and using firearms and explosives to attack victims. Since Columbine, there's been numerous tragedies across the United States and across the world, which has caused the FBI to rethink the actual terminology and definition. And what we're talking about is an individual who goes into a crowded area, a high populous area, and uses a weapon of any kind to inflict injury or death on individuals at that location. The FBI's definition has then changed from an active shooter to an active attack event because we're looking at a multitude of different locations, weapons used. It's no longer a single event, but it could be an event that carries out for a period of time and location. So they adjusted the definition to fit more the criteria of what we're seeing today. Again, an active attack event with the purpose of mass murder. That's the suspect, the offender's objective in these cases. When we talk about the active attacker, we always want to know, who do we need to watch out for? What is the person that is most likely to commit an act of mass violence? And the FBI has been studying this and looking at statistics since they began collecting shortly after Columbine, and they've been trying to obtain a profile that fits the attacker. And I'm here to tell you, there is not one. There isn't a general definition of a person that is willing to go out and take the lives of individuals. Someone that we could say, look for this certain ethnicity, this certain race, this certain religious group, this certain age. It doesn't matter. We're finding that there is a variation from one end of the spectrum to the other, which makes it very difficult to predict these incidents before they can occur or do occur within our educational facilities, businesses, or while you're out shopping at a grocery store. We do find that they do have an avenger mindset, meaning that most of them feel that they've been wronged. They've been dealt a bad hand, and they're carrying out this act of vengeance on the people they may or may not know in order to satisfy that grievance against them. So when you have an avenger mindset, you have somebody who's purposeful, who is driven to carry out a mission that they feel is justifiable, and they are not going to be turned away, persuaded, coached, or negotiated with while they're doing this act of violence. They are set there to do and carry out what they had already pre-planned to do in some cases. And there is often an idea that these individuals do pose they either set up a account on a underground website or Facebook or social media. They may say some very things to their friends, to their family, that really don't sound right. And sometimes we do see that. Sometimes there is a commonality where they broadcast what they're going to do. They put it out there that they have a real problem with a certain type of people, a real problem with an organization, but sometimes they don't. And you'll see that throughout our talk today, and if you do some research, some don't mention anything at all before they carry out the attack. And again, that goes back to the fact that we can't give you an exact definition of who that attacker is going to be, their history, or what it exactly drives them. Risk factors, though, are common and may indicate that there could be an issue in the future. So we're talking about mental health issues. We're talking about domestic violence. We're talking about sexual victimization. We're talking about being bullied. Different things that go on in a person's life that could motivate them to become angry, that could motivate them to want to hurt others. It doesn't mean that they will. And that's what we're talking about as risk factors, not necessarily something that is going to contribute, definitely, because we all experience hardship. We all experience things in our lives that cause us to get angry, to become emotional. But in some cases, those things do manifest themselves into ideations and things like that that motivate these individuals to hurt people. And when we're talking about behaviors and we're talking about these stigmas, that's when mental health facilities and mental health professionals have to be involved. And that's when you have to say something if you see something. If you're on social media and you're beginning to see somebody show a pattern of behavior or display symptoms that are outside the norm, we need to become involved and we need to become active in those situations. It's more often than not that we step back and think, oh, well, this person isn't capable of that, or I know that person, they would never step across this line. But we often see that post the incident, they look back and they say, well, they did give us some signs, symptoms, or show some sort of motivation prior to the attack occurring. So they began collecting data, and I want you to just go ahead and take a look as this plays through. And I'm going to ask you for a little bit of feedback. So watch where the dots are. The yellow indicate acts of violence involving a gun. Red indicate acts of violence involving a knife, and blue indicate acts of violence using a vehicle. What do we see on this map? Start yelling out what you're observing. Guns? What about the locations? Probably locations of high populace, but are they consistent? No. What about the very obvious number of them? Are they slowing down or are they getting greater? Greater. You'll see as it picks up from 2000 all the way up to 2021, I believe, where the statistics have stopped, it's starting to become a more and more common trend. Acts of violence using weapons, and then you start to see a disbursement of colors. Now we're talking knives, now we're talking vehicles as weapons. So yes, guns may have been a common theme in the early portions of these unfortunate incidents, but it's not necessarily the trend as we see it moving forward. Again, the size of the dot indicates the number of victims. The bigger the dot, the more victims at that location. But you can see this is a trending pattern of behavior that unfortunately does not seem to be stopping. And so we're talking about 464 total incidents since 2000, based on the FBI statistics. And I will say that there's probably some outliers in there that didn't get classified as an active shooting event, whether it was employee violence or workplace violence, things like that. So there may be a few give or take in there. When we break down those 464 incidents, we then begin to look at where is the most common place that these unfortunate incidents are occurring. And we would automatically think schools, right? We'd automatically think, the horrific events that happen at elementary schools, soft targets, locations where there's not police, where there's not armed persons, where there's not good security. But we're looking at places of business, your grocery stores, your movie theaters, your concerts, your more than likely places we visit more often than our place of business. We're often out doing things with our families. We're often doing things out of pleasure. And that's where you need to start thinking about, is it more likely going to happen if I'm at work or while I'm on my day off? And statistics are showing more likely when you're not necessarily at the workplace. And you want to know, well, if we're talking about an avenger mindset, isn't there more than likely a chance that this person's going to know me? I don't know too many people who want to hurt me. I don't know too many people that would want to do something like this. But statistics say it's about 50-50 chance that when the avenger goes and they begin committing this act of violence, they may or may not know their victims. They may have direct communication with them. They may have, again, a history with them, but they may not. And so we're talking about that avenger profile, and I'm just trying to reaffirm to you that we don't necessarily have one. George here says, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So we're talking about unfortunate things that have occurred in our country and around the world, and what can we learn from them and learn about them? So the Santa Barbara, California incident, this individual started off in their residence stabbing multiple persons that they knew. And then it transitioned into a campus where they then used a weapon to start shooting college students. And then they got into their vehicle and they began fleeing, and a pursuit occurred, and then they used the vehicle as a weapon to strike pedestrians that were not related to the incident. So this is the active attacker mindset. They are using what they can in the situation that they're in to influence and inflict, rather, mass violence. Orlando, Florida, the Pulse nightclub shooting. If you're familiar, this individual, it was deemed a terroristic attack because they declared some relationship to a religion, but that individual was an active participant at that facility. They went there and they attended the club, they partied at the club, they knew the layout, they knew the people, They went there and they committed a horrific incident with a weapon and ultimately barricaded themselves in a bathroom, which was eventually handled after a long, long standoff with police. But, with, I believe, around 49 individuals who lost their lives there, that just goes to show you, Pulse nightclub, no one was going in there and thinking that they were going to be attacked or hurt. Again, Las Vegas, we're talking about the Country Music Festival. Thousands of folks that are out on an open lawn who are enjoying music when an individual starts beginning to fire upon them from an elevated position. In this case, the shooter, not having any relationship to the persons in attendance of that concert, begins victimizing them using a rifle, and you're in a situation now where you're in an open field. And we talk about the principles, which we will discuss later, avoid, deny, defend. You don't have a lot of options when you're in an open field other than to start moving quickly and start getting out of the area as quickly as you can. And we'll talk about how that's the most applicable response to a situation in that circumstance, but you have to be able to make a decision and quick, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later. New York City, this was an individual who rented a Home Depot truck and used it to, I believe, victimize 15 individuals that had no relationship with. Again, just rented a truck from Home Depot. You can do that pretty easily. There's no background checks, there's nothing, but they will use whatever tools that they can to carry out these acts of mass violence. Sutherland Springs. This individual came into a church that they were, I believe, an attendee of. I believe that they knew the church. They knew that it wasn't guarded by law enforcement. They knew it was a rural area. I believe they victimized about 20 individuals. They killed about 20 and wounded about 26. Deciding factor in this case was somebody in the congregation had a concealed carry permit. They went out to their vehicle, they retrieved their legally owned firearm, and they took the fight to the individual that came to victimize the congregation, and they drove him off and prevented any further attack. So a horrible, horrible situation, but somebody took an action that was in that congregation. It wasn't police. It was somebody that was there and decided to make a move. So what are the things that contribute to the number of victims in a location? What are we looking at? What does the establishment offer? What is going to be the contributing factors? And we're going to be looking mainly at two. How quickly police arrive and target availability. So let me ask you, what do you think the average police response is across the country, across the United States? Not necessarily in Frederick, but on average. 20 minutes. Ooh. 5 minutes, we're getting closer. Not that 20 minutes couldn't be possible. It could. There are very many rural communities out there. 5 minutes. 11, it's less than 5. 3 minutes. Average police response to an incident is 3 minutes. And you're talking somebody calling, somebody getting a hold of a dispatcher getting on the computer, sending the message to the police, and then the police responding. There's a lot of things that occur in that 3 minutes. But has anybody ever sat still for 3 minutes? It is a long time. It's a long time to sit still or to be in control of your own survivability, your own survival. That's what we're trying to express today, is that there's a time between the incident taking place and the point at which police can be responding and get there, where you have to make an active decision in your survivability. So we're looking at disaster response, and we're talking about just the mentality of the individual, of the human mind, when it comes to processing what is going on and how we should act. And there is a professor or a researcher by the name of Ripley, and she started looking at what is the mental process for going through a disaster response. What do we literally have to do in our minds to get to the point of acting once we do realize that there's something terrible happening? And I'm talking about natural disasters is what she was really looking at. And When she started breaking down her research, she labeled 3 different things that the individual needs to go through in order to get to a point of reacting. And they are going to be the stage of denial, of deliberation, and then of the decisive moment. So 3 things, no matter who you are as a person, you have to mentally process in order to act and to do something. So when we talk about denial, it's something that we all go through. And there's a cheesy cartoon up here just to talk about that a little bit. We're looking at what is the brain most likely to do? Who believes here that the brain wants to immediately go to the worst case scenario and think that your life is in jeopardy? When you hear a creak in your house, when you hear something weird outside, when you go ahead and you look at something and it looks odd. Some of us might, but more realistically, the brain likes to deny it. It likes to rationalize weird behavior and odd situation as just being, that's not really that. That wasn't gunshots. That was fireworks at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. That was a backfiring of a vehicle in the parking lot. We tend to, as humans, become lazy. We like to not be put in a position where we're uncomfortable, so we like to normalize. And so the denial part is very much a thing we need to get over. It's a thing that we need to address right away. When the World Trade Center was hit and the evacuations began, what do you think people started doing? Were they immediately running down the stairs, and were they immediately trying to run for their lives? Nope. They were shutting down their computers. They were making sure that they had all of their belongings. They were going through a routine to them that normalized the event, that didn't make it feel as scary. But that's just the process the brain goes through, and each one of us act differently under stress. They did a study where they started looking at social proofing, the act of what does it take to get people to get up and move. And we're going to take a look at this study that was replicated in, I believe they're in England when the video starts. And they're going to look at what does the first person do, or how do we react when we look around and we see others reacting. And it'll make more sense when you watch it.
Plays like this street in New York City. If you were unfortunate enough to be the victim of a crime or taken ill unexpectedly, you might think that surrounded by all these people, someone would intervene. After all, isn't there safety in numbers? Psychologists say no. Research suggests that often a victim is less likely to receive assistance when surrounded by a group rather than a single bystander. When people are in a crowd, it's easier to pass the buck. It's what psychologists call the diffusion of responsibility. Liverpool Street Station in London, a busy thoroughfare for commuters. Unknown to these passers-by, Peter is an actor. As part of an experiment on bystander apathy, he's pretending to be ill.
Help! Help!
How long before he gets help?
Please, somebody. Help! Help me, somebody. Please help me.
Helping would be inconvenient or even risky. He lies there for more than 20 minutes and no one raises an eyebrow.
Please, somebody help me.
It's always very distressing to watch situations like this where people are obviously suffering and no one's actually helping them. But what we have here is 2 conflicting rules. One is the rule that we ought to help, and the other is the rule that we ought to do what everybody else is doing. And here you have effectively a group of strangers who are exerting the pressure not to intervene, not to help. And it's very difficult to rebel.
Ruth, another actor, takes Peter's place. How long before she receives help? Four minutes later, and 34 people have passed without stopping.
Well, people don't really want to know. They just haven't got the time. Well, they have got the time, they just don't want to get involved.
Unwittingly, these strangers have silently formed a temporary group with a rule: don't get involved. They're afraid to stand out from the crowd and won't take action if no one else does. This woman has clearly spotted Ruth, but she conforms to the rule and does nothing. Watch what happens, though, when someone else helps.
You alright? You alright?
Yes, thank you.
Sure, you look a bit clicky, you know what I mean?
She suddenly finds herself in a different group with a new rule: to help.
You want to sit up?
She don't look well, does she?
You alright, yeah? Sure.
First I thought she was dead. Then I sort of checked to see if she was breathing or not. And I looked around and I couldn't believe that no one had noticed her, because there was a bloke sat there just absorbed in reading a newspaper.
This time, Peter's dressed as a respectable gentleman. Now that his dress is in keeping with those around him, how long before he's rescued?
Hello, sir. How are you today?
I'm all right.
6 seconds. She even calls him sir, and suddenly everyone's a good Samaritan.
Do you suffer from epilepsy?
No.
Why you're lying on the floor in the rain?
Because he's part of the right group, everyone wants to help.
I would just hate to be in his position of feeling ill and nobody helping and walking past, so I'd just like to check that he was okay.
And I thought, well, it's wet, so he must really be ill because he's going to ruin his suit anyway.
So in this particular study, they did take some social norming, some clothing, how does the person appear, and they took a few other factors into their study that obviously become apparent in the end of the video. But the point being, how many people walked by an individual seeing that they were obviously in some form of distress and looked upon others to see what the social norming was before they chose to act? Similarly, have you ever attended a fancy dinner and you look down at your plate and you've got an assortment of forks, spoons, knives, cups, dishware, and you're looking at everyone else to see which fork that they pick up in order to start eating your salad because you're unfamiliar with the circumstances? Sometimes we look to others to act first so that we don't seem like we're overreacting or we're acting outside the social norms. And that's what we need to get over. We need to be able to actively take a role in that first initial action, if that makes sense. So then we get to the point of the deliberation. And we're looking at what does the human mind need to go through when it gets into a point of making a decision. And there's a lot of contributing factors. We're talking about, have you ever been in this situation before? Have you thought about this decision if you ever needed to make it? What are some external things that could be impressing upon you? But we're getting into the idea of what the human brain versus what they call in this presentation, and don't let me lose you here, but the lizard brain, or your more instinctive brain. What we're thinking about here is the cognitive abilities of your brain ultimately kind of inhibit us from making decisions sometimes, because that's the rationale aspect of our brains, the human cognitive mind. We like to think about things, we like to process them, we like to weigh our decisions, the pros and cons, and then we have that instinctive brain that reacts on training, that reacts on sheer emotions and survivability. So we have to be able to look at how we can process quickly in these situations while dealing with some conflicting influences. And the human brain, like I said, is coming down to like rationalizing, well, what should I do? Should I run? Should I fight, flight, freeze? That's what they're talking about as the rational mind, thinking about it. Whereas the lizard brain, when they break it down, and unfortunately I don't believe the slide does, the lizard brain is reacting without thinking, reacting without any type of emotion. Just, I realize that it's ingrained in me because I've trained this way that I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And that's what they're trying to get across in this slide, is we have to be able to think about these things because they're tough. They're tough to process in the moment. So what are we doing in an environment like this, which the next slide will demonstrate, where we have low stress, and we can think about it rationally, we can use that human brain, whereas when we're in the moment of sheer terror and our stress is elevated, but we've thought about it and we've practiced it and we are able to make a decision. Because we're looking at basically a scale here. You're sitting here pretty calm, you're about average 60 beats per minute, you can think clearly, you can use all of your motor skills, you can hear what I'm saying, you can see, and you can verbalize. Well, some of those things begin to go away while you get into a situation where you become stressed. At the yellow, the 90 beats per minute, a little bit of elevation, 90 beats per minute, you start to lose fine motor skills. You begin to only be able to use gross motor skills, and that's because your body is beginning to protect itself. It's pulling the oxygenated blood from your extremities to your core to be able to survive an incident. So 90 and then into the 120, we're starting to lose gross motor skills. We're starting to become incapable of manipulating doorknobs, of doing things, of pushing open doors, things that we could commonly do when our stress levels are low, just because our elevated blood pressure has caused our body to now go into survival mode. You get into the 120 and 150, and you begin to lose your senses. Your sense of hearing is the first thing most likely to go. If you've ever heard of auditory exclusion, more often than not, you have your examples like there's a scene in Saving Private Ryan when they're on the beaches and the picture is playing but there's no sound. And that's exactly what your body goes through. It starts to shut down unnecessary things in order to, again, use the blood and the resources to increase your survivability. You begin to lose your peripheral vision and you get what's called tunnel vision, and you start to look at what's just a few feet in front of you and what's in a narrow scope. Often when we interview victims of gun violence, they'll remember the gun being pointed at them, but they don't remember the person, they don't remember what's going on around them because their tunnel vision is fixed on that object of threat, and their body's reacting naturally to it. If you're in the black, I'm sorry, but you're shut down. Your body has gone into a complete overload, and you are incapable of deciding, you're incapable of acting. You most likely will just be lying there. And that's just an overwhelming point where you as an individual can't even actively take a role in your own survival, let alone in those around you, because you've just become so overwhelmed with the circumstances. So we talk about that gross motor functions, the loss of it. And this is a Jewish market in France that came under attack, and you'll see that the patrons in it are reacting to the threat that's going on around them. Particularly, pay attention to the woman who is pushing her child in a baby carriage, and we'll talk about it in just a moment after it plays. So it's just an example of under stress what we normally do and what we're very comfortable with. This woman has probably removed her child from that same stroller, 100 times. But in the heat of the moment, those straps are difficult to get over the child's arms. That clasp is difficult to manipulate because the elevated stress in her person is causing her, again, failure on her gross and fine motor skills. And so we need to realize that in the moment, if we're not having already thought about our body's reaction, if we're not already thought about the process of what we need to go through, the denial, the deliberation, and when it comes to the decisive moment, then we are setting ourselves up for failure. Because who's going to be able to perform under the most stressful of circumstances? Not normally anybody. So we need to be forward thinking when it comes to this. Remind me of the club, please.
Station Nightclub.
Station Nightclub. Station Nightclub was the scene of a horrific incident where there was a rock band playing, and it was a very well-attended event. And part of that rock band, I'm getting ahead of myself, but there was some pyrotechnics. So before we get into all of that, how many of you go out to a restaurant or go out to a show and often look around to see where the nearest exits are, just out of... I'm seeing some hands. Okay. We can be honest with ourselves. This can be rhetorical as well. This is important because in this instance, we will see that when the circumstances change and everyone's forced to exit, they all go back to the point of where they came in at. They did not look to see what the alternative exits were. They were not aware probably of where they were because we get into that complacent mindset where we don't think it could happen to us. And whenever the situation does occur, having to go through that process of now finding the exits is all the more difficult. So getting back to the circumstances, you have a pyrotechnics that go off in this show. It's planned, but unfortunately they light the stage on fire. And now the stage is engulfed in flames in a mere seconds, and you have hundreds probably of individuals trying to escape, now with fear, now with stress. And we're going to see an unfortunate video. I want you to pay attention, though, to the time lapse of whenever the stage begins to catch fire and the reactions of those in attendance. And it will play a timer for you.
I'll just throw a little caveat in here from the fire side. The club was also over capacity. Surprise, surprise. But it was one of the other things that contributed to the disaster, for lack of a better term, that happened here.
So we saw in the video the immediate pyrotechnic goes up. It ignites a foam or some sort of insulation, and immediately you hear, most likely if you watch it a couple more times, you can hear the band say, oh, that's not good. And then at the same time, that's when people are starting to signal for the others to turn around and get out, but we're talking individuals who are enjoying themselves. I'm sure there's some alcoholic beverages involved, and we're talking about a loud noise, and of course the fire alarm. Now that adds to the confusion, but if you weren't preparing when you went in there to make a hasty exit, you're going to join the mass who are headed back toward the location that they came in, and you're going to end up getting stuck in the door just like these individuals. And those plotted points are the bodies of the deceased that died from the smoke inhalation and the fire, obviously. The majority of them being at the entrance, 31, and then you have the overflow, the 9 and the 18 that were probably headed there as well, but could not get into the crowd of folks. And then you have a disbursement of individuals who most likely were fleeing for their lives and found themselves running into dead ends, into areas that had no immediate exit. And on top of that, again, the lighting being dim, probably the smoke contributed to some confusion as well. But we can see there's multiple exits on this location. You have the front one, you have a rear stage one, might not be visible right away. I'm not saying that would be obvious, but there's one off the bar, and I guarantee you a lot of them visited the bar to get a beverage, and then there's one off the kitchen. There's windows, there's other alternative exits that probably weren't considered necessarily right away. I do believe some people forced entry out on their own, but that's after you realize that your initial plan is failing and you're most likely going to plan B, C, or D.
There were a total of 330 people injured in this fire. 100 of them died. 96 of them died right in that building. And to Sergeant Thomas's point, everybody probably came in that entrance because look at where the bodies are stacked up. We used to play, I don't want to call it a game, but in tactical training, you walk into a room and the instructor tells you close your eyes and point to the way you came in, and everybody can do it. And then you say, okay, now point to the other exits in the room. And you're like, are there other exits in the room? 2 exits with no bodies. Now, obviously, some people got out of there, but the main choke point there, we have the largest loss of life on site right there. So just keep that in mind as you walk into places, any place you go into. How did I come in, but how do I get out another way?
The next picture is very graphic, but it's to the point of what we're explaining. The large number of bodies that are stuck in the doorway that are incapable of exiting themselves and they're incapable of letting the others out become now the problem. And folks obviously perished right there in the door. And that's the unfortunate truth of this incident. So when we're talking about deliberation, we're talking about this is probably going to be the most stressful point of your life. When you're in a traumatic incident where there's potential for loss of life, including your own, and what do you do? And I would submit to you that first you need to start by controlling yourself. You can't necessarily control what's going on right around you right away, controlling yourself. And that comes through a few things. Calming yourself through what we would consider combat breathing, or what you might have heard as box breathing. 4 seconds in, 4-second hold, 4-second out, repeat. That is what's going to restore blood flow back to your brain. If you're doing short breaths that are denying your body the ability to transfer that oxygen into your bloodstream and remove the carbon dioxide, you're going to begin to experience what we talked about, and that's the loss of body function and loss of senses. So immediately starting to control your breathing is going to improve your decision making and your survivability a bunchfold. I mean, statistically, I could probably find statistics on it, but you're going to increase your ability to make decisions. So controlling your breathing, very big. Shifting your emotion. No one's going to go through this and not be scared, not be thinking about their families, not be thinking about their own lives. And I'm saying to you to use that emotion of fear and put that into a drive and a fierceness, an anger almost, to survive. You want to survive. You want to see your family. You don't want to be victimized that day. You sure as heck don't care for this person coming into your establishment or where you're at and trying to harm you. So now I'm going to use that energy and that emotion to do one of the things that we're going to talk about: avoid, deny, or defend. You're going to channel that energy into a positive rather than immediately going into a point of 175, complete, overwhelmed with fear and stress. And there is a lot of statistics out there that say if you're fit, if you exercise, if you train in stressful environments like we do as law enforcement, and I'm not saying that you need to do that, but you have to understand that we do that for a purpose. We put ourselves in that yellow to red range routinely to condition our bodies to make decisions under stress. So we have to repurpose our training and our thought process to say, well, if other entities are doing it to prepare themselves for stressful events, how can I do that in what's applicable in my world? And that's where we're talking about staying fit. We stay fit to deal with the stress, the hormones, and all of that are dumped during these events. So we're talking again about scripting and practicing.
So we talk about scripting. Every day when you're sitting at work, you're sitting at home, you're at the store, you're out to dinner, you're at the playground with your kids or family events, ask yourself what if. And it's not the what if we have an active attacker incident. It's what if there's a fire? What if somebody has a heart attack? What if it starts to downpour and I'm on the other side of the parking lot from my car? The what ifs are the things that you want to run through your head continuously for everything we do. We all know how to do our jobs. We go to work every day and we've asked ourselves, well, what if I get this type of incident? Or what if I get this type of person I have to deal with? Or what if I have to write this report? We've already gone through all that. We call it training. But it's just a way to train yourself with the what ifs and then practice them. I mean, we all did fire drills in school. We might have done natural disaster drills. Now we're doing active attacker drills in school. So take that what if, put it into a practical application, because I can tell you from experience, when something out of the ordinary happens, regardless of what it is, you're going to, as Sergeant Thomas said, when your brain starts to shut down, you're going to kick back to that training. You're going to go back to those what ifs, and it's not as scary as if it just caught you completely by surprise. It's still going to be, you're still going to have that fear. And as a firearms instructor, we tell recruits in the academy, fear is a good thing. Panic is not. It's good to be afraid because fear, as we know, we've all had those, you walk into a room and then the electric goes out and you're in there in the pitch black and you're like, all right, this isn't good, but it's not terrible. And you can start to hear things, you can start to sense things a little bit more. Fear is good, fear keeps you alive. Panic is what causes problems. So practice those things so that we don't get to the panic point.
And if I can mention one more thing on practice, I've been asked a lot about practicing within your organizations, and there's a lot of things that need to be addressed with practicing. Practicing or implementing drills is not not easy, but it shouldn't be taken lightly. We're talking making sure everyone's aware it's a drill. We never practice drills by just springing it on our employees. We make sure it's articulated to the law enforcement that we're running drills. We're making sure that the drills are planned in a way that they're productive. We want to make sure that there's objectives that are being carried out and achieved through the training. So when we're talking practicing, mental practicing is great. That's what we can all do. But if you're thinking, well, we need to be running drills in our agency or in our department or in our place of business, there's some things that we need to talk about after the fact, after this presentation, to help you get to that point. But this is where we need to start. Rick Rescolora, and I'm probably going to butcher that, I apologize. This man is a hero. And if you're not familiar with the name, you can contribute the survival of thousands. I believe it was around 1,300 or 1,700 employees. If you could bring up the next slide. This gentleman was at the World Trade Center, and he was an employee for the firm, and I always have to look this up, Dean, Witter, Morgan, and Stanley Company on the World Trade Center. He was there when it was initially bombed. He was employed as their security, and he was there when it was bombed. He ran the drills that he had established because he was a forward-thinking man. He was a very driven individual to encompass drills and to make sure that everyone was aware of what they should do during an incident. So when the World Trade Center was bombed the first time, we all know that bombing, it was a horrific event, but it was nothing compared to 9/11. But the bombing got him thinking, and he went to his employers and said, okay, we saw that this building is vulnerable. We want to pre-plan, and we want to think about, well, what might happen if we were to be attacked again, and what would that look like? And Rick actually put the effort into researching and devised the most likelihood would be a plane strike. And I'm telling you this in full confidence that he went to his employers and said, our building is susceptible to a plane strike. We need to move all of our offices and all of our thousands of people out of the World Trade Center and over across the river to a smaller profile building. And they're like, no, we're not doing that, Rick. We're staying here, and we're going to go ahead and we'll let you do what you need to do, but we're not moving. So what does Rick do with this foresight and thought and process? He starts devoting his time to running drills. Now, how inconvenient do you think it is to run drills with thousands of people? Not just a department of 20 or 30 where we might think, oh man, this is inconvenient to take part of our day whenever I can be doing something and devote it to learning what I need to do in the moment. But he had that thought with thousands, and he ran drills. And I'm sure people did not appreciate the name Rick Rescolora at the time, but post 9/11, we see what his effort contributed to. So on the day of 9/11/2001, Rick was working in the building when the first tower was struck. And the first tower was not his tower. He was aware that what was going on, and they immediately go over the intercom in the second tower and say, everyone shelter in place. We don't know what's going on. Just stay where you're at. And Rick's like, no way. He said, there's something going on in the other building. We are getting out. And he initiates his drills that he had practiced, that he had put into place, that everyone was aware of, and they begin evacuating all of the offices. And I was a little off on my number. 2,700 people escaped the tower because Rick had put into effort plans and drills and educated people on what to do when the situation went down. And Rick was last seen after the 2,700 individuals escaped going back in the tower to help out others when the tower collapsed after being struck, and he was lost on that day. But we're talking about a person just like you or I, that was able to think about survival in a way that was uncomfortable and maybe a little bit at times inconvenient, but made a difference in 2,700 lives because he pre-planned and he scripted and he put into action these tactics. And here we're talking about three individuals who were on a train in Europe, who two of them were military men, and I believe one was not. And they were on a train when an active attack event occurred on the train. And you'll listen to the awards ceremony where they briefly summarize the events. But the point to take away is in this moment, these three men chose to do something which contributed to the saving of lives on this train. And you'll...
Less than a month ago, 3 childhood friends were on a train bound for Paris when they heard a gunshot. Amid screams and commotion of the passengers, they quickly focused on a man wielding an AK-47. Almost instantly, one of them said, "Let's go," and the 3 ran toward the shooter. Those 3 friends are with us here today. Thank you, Alec, Spencer, and Anthony, for what you did on that train and for joining us here. He and Spencer and Anthony sprinted toward the gunman while he trained his rifle on them. Spencer tackled the assailant and the 3 worked to disarm him. As we know, Spencer was stabbed in that effort. After they knocked out the gunman, they tended to other injured on board before paramedics and police arrived.
The biggest takeaway from this is, yes, they were military men, at least 2 of them. They've trained, they've thought about, being in harm's way and putting themselves in a position where they could be hurt. But they recognize they're on a train. There is very little opportunity to avoid an attacker when you're on a train. There's no getting off, especially the train's in motion. Again, to deny them, I'm not sure what the cars looked like. They might not have been in a room, a private room they could barricade. So now they just have one option, that's to defend themselves. And if others haven't gone through the thought process of what they would do in this instance, they might not be acting at this moment, so they chose to take action. And they all 3 worked together on a single assailant to disarm them and to prevent any further loss of life. That's what we're talking about today. It's those decisions that you need to make at that moment for your survivability and those around you. And that's why we're here today, is to talk about the civilian response to active shooting events. When we're talking about the denial stage, we have this video up here. It plays a very corny sound of gunshots. Has anybody ever heard gunshots outside? Has anybody ever heard gunshots inside? What do you think? Do they sound similar? I get some heads shaking no. That's correct. They're not going to sound alike. They are not going to sound like your traditional shots on a firearms range, depending on where you're standing in the building, depending on the surfaces inside the building and whether they absorb sound, whether they are keeping the sound from exiting that room. You may not really have a clear idea of what that gunshot's going to sound like, but you know your workplace environments. You know the places that you frequent, and that sound did not sound right. And that's the denial aspect where you have to get out of that normalizing, unfortunately, that normalizing thing that we tend to do as humans and say, I need to do something. I've got my grandkids, I've got my family, I've got my client. We need to do something. And I'm not going to sit here and wait for that sound to happen again or to make any type of investigatory efforts. I'm going to make a choice on what is appropriate at that moment. I would submit to you that playing dead is not an option. And I really think that down deep, if you were ever in a situation where you had to unfortunately go through this, that you would want to just lay there and play dead. I think that is going to be a point in your life where you are completely out of control. You're out of control what happens to you, and you have now gone to a single option where I can submit to you have multiple options, and there's going to be the appropriate option in your situation. But playing dead is not an option. So we're going to go ahead and, if you mind pausing this for a moment, I'll set it up. young lady was a student at Virginia Tech, and she's going to talk about her experience of sitting in the second classroom, I believe it was 211, that was visited multiple times by the shooter. When she was present in the classroom, what was said, what happened, and the amount of time that they had to react.
We heard the first shots at around 9:40 a.m. I was sitting on the wall of the classroom, so in the hallway, and I could hear the shots getting closer and closer very quickly. I mean, there was only a few seconds between the first time we heard them and when he actually walked in. To me, it sounded like an axe being taken to a piece of wood. And our teacher, she opened the door and she peered outside and she immediately shut the door and she said, "Call 911." And right then, he walked in just seconds after. There's absolutely no time to think or to duck or to take cover, and people just kind of fell to the floor. And he immediately walked in shooting, and he went to the other side of the classroom and he started going down the rows. He went down each row very quickly, very purposefully. And I remember thinking, your turn is coming. You're going to get shot. I mean, I didn't realize there was an active shooter, but I knew something bad was happening. He came back to our classroom 3 times, and on the 3rd time, he killed himself in the front of the class. In between each time he was there, you could just hear people crying and coughing, and the cell phone started ringing. When he was in our class, I remember trying not to breathe very much, so he couldn't tell I was alive. Because as my stomach was hitting the chair, I was thinking, he can see me breathing, he can see me alive, and that was very scary. I'll never forget when the SWAT team first broke in at around 9:51. The officer in the front of the classroom said, "We have a lot of blacks in here." And at the time, I couldn't comprehend what he was talking about, but he meant triage codes. And I remember looking into the girl to my right and realizing, what black meant. He looked over me and first he said yellow, and then he changed it immediately and he said red. And that's when I first started panicking. I still couldn't speak. I was shot 3 times, lying on my back, and I remember thinking, what do you see? Like, what can you see on me that I can't, that you would change me from yellow to red? He killed 12 people in my classroom, including our teacher.
So we'll break down the Virginia Tech incident a little bit further, and you'll see exactly what each classroom did in response. And unfortunately, like this young lady said, her classroom was almost immediately attacked upon entry. There wasn't a whole lot of time to react, but we'll discuss what you can do in these certain circumstances. Understand that Virginia Tech was a situation where the attacker chained the door shut, so there wasn't an immediate ability for the police to make entry because they were chained from the inside. So there was additional time that this individual had to go throughout the building to victimize. Again, hiding and hoping. And I understand that we're in a religious establishment. Everyone has their faith, and I'm not going to come down on you for praying or looking to a higher power at that point, but action on your part is what's going to be very important at this point in time. We need to understand how that impacts this overall situation. And we're going to talk about the avoid, deny, defend principle, which you may have heard as run, hide, fight. We're using terms interchangeably here. But the avoid, deny, defend principles are going to be your options in these situations. And you don't necessarily have to stick to one, and we'll talk about this wholeheartedly. You can begin with one, move to the next, realize that you have to go back to another. There's definitely a fluidity when it comes to the options and what you choose to do in these situations. So when we talk about avoiding, we're going to, I believe, go back to our video after it runs through the avoid, deny, defend principle. Go ahead. So avoiding. This is a public meeting with a school board in which they are discussing their business as usual, but previously they had just let a woman go that was a teacher within the school district. And we talked about those attackers having a vengeance, having a motivation to commit acts of mass violence. Well, this was the the husband of the woman who was fired from the education facility, from the school, and he goes into this meeting to begin taking a vengeful act against the board, and you'll see it in this video. Let's watch it play out, and then we'll discuss some of the things that you see after it's over.
Technology to notice it's on the chart that you have there, and it's part of the plan that we have, that the workshop we're going to have to follow this meeting, but this would be the first step in that whole process. I have a motion. A motion to everybody in this room behind that counter at the road. Please, certainly,
You can't hear him well. He's excusing people from the audience and from the board. He's excusing certain individuals.
Hey, sir. John, just let him talk. He's talking. John, go ahead. Ginger. No, Ginger. Ginger.
So, did you notice how long it took them to realize this guy's walking up there with a gun? Everybody just kind of does the, what? That's that cycle. Your brain's seeing something that you don't see people walk into a public meeting and then just pull a gun out. It's not the norm.
Also, if you heard the spray painting going on, he was spray painting that giant V on the side of the wall. And I don't know about you, that doesn't happen in any of my meetings that I attend. So that was very out of the ordinary.
I haven't seen it happen in a mayor and board meeting yet. But so we have the delay in what's going on. You see the board, they pushed their chairs back to what? You know, there was no, obviously they had no idea what to do in a situation like this. So this is where we go into the situational awareness. Somebody gets up and starts spray painting, okay, this isn't right. And then they pull a gun out, okay, well, what have we done to plan for this? Or if we don't have a plan for this, we're gonna have to decide to do something. Do we just sit there and watch them and wait for them to walk up here? And you see the lady, I think it was the lady came in behind him and smacked him over the head with her pocketbook. If that was my wife's pocketbook, he'd be dead. But he turns around and addresses her, and the rest of them just sit there and watch. So nobody really had any idea what to do in this situation.
Yeah, exactly. And just to piggyback on the things, if you've noticed the congregation or the attendees, the audience, they were excused. How many of them made sure they had all their belongings before they left? You saw people picking stuff up and taking their time. Like, you need to act, and the action needs to be immediate. We talked about the woman. I mean, brave, just as Sergeant Brown said, brave to come up and strike the man with the gun with her purse. What was the reaction of the board? Did you notice that he's turned and looking down at the woman? The board members do nothing. They don't take advantage of that opportunity to immediately take the fight to him. Just some backstory, he ends up being engaged by a security officer and killed. He does just charge his weapon into the front of the board members' desks there. Does not strike anybody, does not kill anybody. The wife is later interviewed, and she makes statements that he was an excellent marksman. If he wanted to hurt anybody, he absolutely could. But that's not our decision, or it's not for us to make that decision at the time. That threat is there. We need to consider them all capable of taking lives, and we need to make active efforts to increase our survivability. So we need to be working together within our workplace, just within our workplaces and those that we are commonly in the office with, to have knowledge of, well, if this happens to us, what are we going to do about it? What's the plan? So in the moment, that plan doesn't need to be made in the haste. So again, leaving as soon as possible. Do not take any time to gather anything. Know your exits. Let me ask you, when do you think you should call 911? Now? Okay. What's the other option? When you're safe. What do you think the pro is to when you're safe? Very good. Sure. Now, if you're doing an aerial denial and you have no ability to avoid, but you are able to call 911, certainly from inside the structure, from where you're at. But we would submit to you, we want you out of the structure. We want you to make the effort to get out any way possible, and we'll talk about that, before you call 911. Yeah, it's important for us to know the information and to get responding, but we want to limit the number of victims inside the facility, and that's by reducing the number of people that are inside, if that makes sense. Pretty much a correlation. You're not there, you can't be victimized, so get out. And that's more important to us, because the 911 calls will start to call in, but we don't want you to have taken the time inside the structure or wherever you're at and delayed your chance to get away, if that makes sense. So again, whenever you have the ability to avoid, please do so. This here is, again, the entrance camera to our Jewish market in Europe. You saw the gunman go into the front doors. If you didn't catch it, there was plenty of people on that sidewalk just above him in the frame. And what did those people do when they saw the threat? Turned and ran. They got away. They didn't run past the open glass doors. They didn't interact with the gunman at that point. Their survivability was ensured because they got away immediately. They didn't take any time to negotiate. Hey man, stop, what are you doing? We want you to use that time wisely and avoid it. So avoiding, we're talking about moving through a structure, away from the threat, if at all possible, if you're outside in an open area, moving as far from that area as possible, because we understand that there is a difference between what we consider in law enforcement concealment and what's considered cover. Concealment just hides you. It does not stop bullets. Cover stops bullets. Those are going to be things of density, concrete, walls, different things of substance that will stop the bullet. So when you think you're protected, you may not be. So don't sit there and take a time and, is this concealment or cover? Use that time to avoid it by continuing to run. Don't necessarily stop if you don't have to. Have anything to add on that one? Fair enough. The avoiding, you'll find you'll maneuver potentially through the building and you'll get to a part of the building where you can't get any further. You're at a dead end. You're now in a position where you have no opportunity to avoid any further, so now you have to move into either denial or defend. So in this instance, in this Jewish market, we had folks that ran into the back and found a storage area. But we can automatically see that there's going to be problems already based on what they're doing. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, they're essentially hiding. The door is open that they came through, which led into the market where the attacker was, so there's no denial there. And then they're not opening their eyes, they're not slowing their breathing, they're not allowing them to take in all the circumstances because there is a door with a dead man push bar on it and a stairway, or rather a ladder to the roof that they're not attempting to access to escape, to further avoid the situation. So by becoming overwhelmed, sometimes we get to a point where we're not, again, using all of our senses like, oh crap, I can do something. I'm not just stuck here. And that's what we're trying to encourage you to work through. Denial. When we talk about denial, it's simply the idea of doing whatever is necessary to avoid that individual coming in through the doors that separate you from that individual. First, start with a lock. If you have a lock on your door, that is going to be the first level of deterrence. Locks don't prevent people from getting in. They will deter somebody. They may be difficult to make their way through, but they can be defeated. So we're not looking at just doing that. We're looking at trying to manipulate the environment in order to make it perceive that there is nobody inside the structure, or inside this room rather. Turning off the lights and then maintaining a distance from the door, especially if it's got glass windows or any type of ability to see through it. So to break it down a little bit further, we have different types of doors, and we can discuss this more in individual training, but there's going to be ways that we can prevent doors from opening and closing. The biggest way is through barricade, and that's moving whatever we can in front of that door, and we're putting it in front of that door. And we're doing that in order to prevent that door from opening and to slow the entry of the individual if there's no lock on it, if there's no ability to prevent them from fully getting in there. Maybe the pile of stuff will be enough and that will deter them from making entry, but we're going to talk about using that ability that now they are cognitively having to work through that problem to our advantage. Oh, now they are trying to make it into a room, now what do we do? But when we're getting into a room and we've barricaded it, then we're looking for other alternative exits. Windows. No one's going to be mad at you if you break out a window at the point where you're now have nowhere else to go. I am fully confident that your employer is going to be fully okay with you throwing that chair through that window and getting out that exit. And I will submit to you that a broken ankle or broken bone is better than a life lost. So if that's a second-story drop, it's survivable. But it might not be completely, pain-free. So understand you have to make these life choices at the time, but again, it's a fluid moment. I've denied them entry, now I'm looking to avoid it. How can I get out? Anything to add?
Just one caveat on the deny and hide. So think about this as the active attack incidents. Majority of these attackers are looking for high profile, high publicity incidents. So they want large loss of life, they want mass casualties, and they want spread out. So they're not going to, again, like Sergeant Thomas said, if you lock the door, they're not going to take the time to force a door open unless it's one of the few where they're targeting a specific person or persons and they know these people are only in that room. But you look at the school shootings that have happened over the past 25 years, and it's fluid, it's movement. If the door's open, they'll go in. If they try the handle and it's locked, they move to the open door. So locking the door is huge. Barricading it, even if they get the door open, and I'm standing here the whole time he's talking, looking at that door there, it doesn't have a lock, but if we shoved these pews and stacked them up to make a wall, by the time somebody forces their way through there, you have time to get out another exit if we haven't already. And are they really going to take the time to go in and investigate that room when they can just move on to an easier target, for lack of a better term?
So we talked about the barricades, the heavier the better. Be creative. Anything that's not bolted to the floor or a wall gets tossed in front of that door. And we're looking at potentially, again, other ways to barricade the door, and I will put this caveat out there. If you go on to Google and you start searching barricades or ways to block the door from opening, there's thousands of products out there. But I will tell you that local fire marshals will have a problem with it, and you will be in violation of fire code if you install different pins and things like that prevent doors from being opening. So just know that there is a balance there. You have to have plans, but you can, liability-wise, set yourselves up if you have different ways that block the door and are violation of fire code. So be careful what you buy and invest in, make wise decisions, but it is very important. Door stops, again, those are simple things. You can use those for inward opening doors to prevent the door from opening, whatever you have available to you. So again, when we're talking back here in this particular image, we have carts, we have different pieces of equipment that can easily be pushed in front of that door to slow that attacker from making entry into the area where they are barricading themselves. Again, when we're overwhelmed with the circumstances, we tend to, again, shut down and we reduce our survivability because we're not optimizing our choices and our decision making. We talked about door stops, simple things that you can use. Outward opening, meaning doors such as the one behind Sergeant Brown that are going to be swinging outward. If they don't have a lock, you can use your belt, you take it out, you loop an end, you throw it over that door handle, and you stand back and you hold onto that extension of your belt in order to not prevent that door from opening. You're displacing yourself from the door so that if that shooter shoots through the door, you're not going to be hit because you're off to the side. But you're still doing what you need to do to prevent the attacker from making entry. And there's, again, different tactics that we can talk about offline. And again, this is what I'm talking about, would not be passable by your fire code, so be careful. They are very highly effective, don't get me wrong, but be very careful on what you purchase. This is a very heart-wrenching video. This is one of the teachers from the Sandy Hook shooting. Listen to her and her thought process on what it took for her to get all of her students in a position where she was able to keep them safe.
That all day we have met people who remind us what teachers do, how much they care even in the face of terror. And I sat down with a first grade teacher at that school, Caitlin Roick. She heard gunfire, large windows exposed her classroom, so she managed to rush 15 small children into a tiny bathroom to try to save their lives.
I put one of my students on top of the toilet dispenser. I just knew we had to get in there. I was just telling them it's going to be okay, you're going to be all right. I pulled a bookshelf before I closed the door in front of it. So it was we were completely barricaded in. I turned the lights off.
Did you tell them to be quiet? Did you worry about one of them?
No, I told them to be quiet. I told them we had to be absolutely quiet. Because I was just so afraid that if he did come in and then he would hear us and then he would maybe just start shooting the door. So I said, no, we just have to be absolutely quiet. And I said, there are bad guys out there now. We need to wait for the good guys. They're coming again. I wanted us to be okay. And I'm so saddened that there are people who in this situation are not okay. And my heart goes out to anyone who knew them and was a part of their lives. I just can't imagine.
Did they cry?
No, if they started crying, I would take their face and say, it's gonna be okay, show me your smile. I really tried to and one of my students would say things like, I know karate, so it's okay, I'll lead the way out.
They really said to you, we want to go home for Christmas.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or I just want to hug my mom, or just, things like that were just heartbreaking, and in my mind, because you're hearing, I've never been a part of something, obviously, anywhere near this traumatic. And so I'm hearing the gunfire in the hallway, and I'm thinking in my mind, I'm the first classroom. Why isn't he coming? I'm thinking, we're next. And, and in my mind, I'm thinking, as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, what are your thoughts? What are your, and I'm thinking that I have to almost be their parent. I have to tell them, so I said to them, I need you to know that I love you all very much and that it's going to be okay, because I thought that was the last thing they were ever gonna hear. I thought we were all gonna die. And I don't know if that's okay, teachers and, but I wanted them to know someone loved them, and I wanted that to be one of the last things they heard. Not the gunfire in the hallway. It's just horrible.
How did you know you were going to be okay? What happened?
I didn't. What finally happened was the gunfire stopped. The gunfire wasn't that long, so that stopped, but I said, no, we're not going anywhere. We're staying here until someone good comes in, gets us out. So eventually what happened was the police came and started knocking, and obviously, I was completely beside myself, and I said, I don't believe you. You need to put your badges under the door. So they put their badges under the door. I said, if you're really a police officer, then you would have a way to get in here. You would have a key, or you would have gotten it from the janitor. If everything's okay now, you would have found the keys. So he had the keys, and he found the right one, and he unlocked the door, and then they brought us out to the firehouse to meet up with the rest of the teachers and students, waiting for parents to come and pick them up.
I think there are a lot of people who wish.
Very emotionally charged woman who was able to make decisions that saved lives of children that day. We all can imagine that she was probably overwhelmed, but she was able to make, again, decisions in the moment because she was responsible for young ones and put into place actionable choices that saved those lives. And that's so important, and she's a hero, obviously. So we're talking about that today to encourage you to think in the same way if this were to happen to you. We talked about the denial, and finally the defend. If you're in a situation where you can't avoid it, you cannot deny them entry into the location where you're at. This is an interior threat. then you have to be in the mindset and prepared with a plan to defend yourself. Okay? This is the most important because it's the hardest to conceptualize. Am I capable of taking a life? Well, you have to understand that your life is dependent on it, the lives of those around you may be dependent on it, and certainly your family wants you to survive the incident. So you have to think long and hard that if this were to come down, I need to be able to mentally make that choice. I understand that we're talking about denying entry, and in some of these places, like this door here particularly, does not have a lock. It's outward opening. It's going to be the hardest to prevent somebody from getting into because all they need to do is open the doors. If our barricade is in that same door frame, yes, we've caused them to have to hesitate, to have to think about what they need to do to get through that barricade and access you in this room. And that is your decisive moment. That is the moment you need to capitalize on. If you're talking about somebody standing there now diverting their attention from you and trying to push, trying to maneuver around the barricade, you need to capitalize on that by defending yourself. And that's an organized plan. That is something that you and the other occupants have thought of. If this attacker is making entry, what are we doing? It doesn't have to be overly complicated. Vince, you go for the legs, I'm going for the top, and we're going to tackle him. Or, Vince, you go for the gun, I'm going to go for his head, whatever. And you have a plan to act together. And what would have been successful in that earlier video that we saw with the board members, had they had a plan and he was distracted, those three men could have easily overpowered that one individual. And I submit to you that accumulation of multiple people can overpower most. There aren't so many out there that are strong enough to take on the masses. So you need to be organized. When you're positioning, you can't be across the room. It might be scary to be right next to the door and out of the door frame, but you need to be prepared to jump on that individual and take them at that moment that they're making entry, because that's when they are the most vulnerable. And you need to arm yourselves. You need to look around the room. I see a couple flags with some very pointy ends that would be very effective for using as weapons. We're talking staplers. We're talking anything blunt, large, and hard that you can use to strike and defend and to fight for your lives at that point. And that's the most very important point, is to make that decision that we are doing this and it's all together. Hesitation is going to cause you to lose that opportune moment.
I'm just going to personalize this for a little bit. How many parents do I have in here today? All right. So when my kids were in school, and again, I live in Pennsylvania, live in a rural area. Our schools were in rural areas. We have state police coverage. I live in the northern end of York County. Our barracks for the state police in the southern end, so there's about a 45-minute response time for the police to get there. So I had this talk with my kids. I remember my son was in middle school, and we went over the whole, get out. If something like this happens, get out. If you can't get out, barricade the door, just like we're talking about. Lock the door, barricade the door. If nobody else in the room is going to make a decision, you're going to make a decision. You're going to start directing things. We're going to get there. And when all else fails, and I'm telling this to a 12-year-old, if all else fails, it's not going to be you. If they come through that door, you have to get your head in the mindset of, it's not me. It's not going to be me today. It's going to be them. So you do everything you can. And ironically, Sergeant Thomas pointed on to the flags, and my son asked, he said, well, Dad, what do I use? And I said, you have an American flag in your classroom, right? Yeah. I said, does it have the pointy end on it? Yeah. I said, there you go. I said, can you pick up your chairs? Yeah. There you go. My son is now a junior at West Virginia University, and just so I didn't distort anything here. My daughter is in nursing, so my children aren't violent children. My son's actually going to be a history teacher. We took him down in August and got him to his apartment. He was in school a couple of weeks. I was talking to him on the phone. I said, what's your active attacker plan now that you're in college? I said, it's a big campus. I said, what's your plan? He goes, ain't gonna be me. I said, all right, cool. I said, everybody else with you on board with that? He said, everybody I talked to. He said, it's not gonna be us. So you just have to get that mindset. We're not teaching children to be violent, but you need to get them ready in this day and age. It's not gonna be me. And you have to get yourself in that mindset. It's not gonna be me today, it's gonna be them. They wanted this problem, they got it. So just work through that.
And that goes with that shifting of motion. We're all going to be scared in that moment, but turn that into drive. And that's when you need to make that moment count for you and for those inside the room that you're responsible for. This is a short video revisiting again our Jewish market. This individual, and you can play it while I talk, is simply realizing that something bad is happening, and they're aware that they may need to defend themselves, and go ahead, Vince. They're looking at just what's around them. And at this point in time, he picks up a wine bottle and arms himself with a wine bottle. Simply a mindset that if I have to go to battle with somebody, I'm going to go with at least something to defend myself with. And we see a range of reactions. Up at the top, you see somebody just going to cover and lying down and taking that approach. And I'm submitting to you that I don't believe that that approach is going to contribute to your survivability. Lieutenant Brian Murphy, this is a mindset testament. Lieutenant Brian Murphy was on patrol responding to an early Sunday morning call for service in which I believe a synagogue or a religious temple was said to have been intruded by an armed gunman. He arrives on scene. He's in an empty parking lot, and he has a doorway that he believes is the main entrance that he begins making the approach to. At that time, the gunman comes out, a gunman armed with a rifle, severely outgunned. He's got a pistol alone. He then engages with the suspect who's exiting the religious establishment. One of the first shots Lieutenant Murphy gets hit with is a rifle round from the chin and then down into the larynx, which you can see on his face left him very scarred. Dazed and confused, he's now in the fight of his life. He's got a gunman that's outgunning him, and he's looking for points of cover. And he starts retreating to his vehicle for tactical cover, but he gets hit multiple times with the rifle. And he recalls that he was bear crawling or army crawling across the ground while the gunman close distance and repeatedly shot him with a rifle at very close distance while he looked at the assailant, at the suspect. He recalls that that suspect had no emotion, had no personal connection that he was killing another human being, was just sheerly shooting a target. But Murphy's mindset was, not today. I'm going to live for my family. I'm going to survive this and continue to fight through that until other officers arrived and engaged the suspect. And you could see his quote on there. It's that mindset. Your body is capable of surviving. More often than not, if you convince yourself you're going to die, you will die. We see it all the time, unfortunately, in law enforcement. Unfortunately, people don't survive survivable wounds because of the mindset. They assume the worst, and your brain is a powerful thing. So it's harnessing that power and directing your thought and your emotion. We've spoken about it all morning. What you do matters. It's very important that your decision-making process be thought out, acted upon, and quick whenever you're in a situation like this. It's going to take us to just a breakdown of the thought process. The act of attack starts. What can you do? Can you avoid? You're going to take that act on that and use the exit to avoid the premise. You're then going to call 911 and let the law enforcement know what's going on. If your primary exits are if your attacker's in between you and your primary exits, meaning you would have to necessarily run through the attacker, don't do that. Then take the denial aspect. Look for a place that you can secure yourself in, secure it, and then look for other alternative exits. Are there windows you can go ahead and throw a chair through? Are there accesses to the roof? You're going to try to take those avenues and then exit from that point. But if there's not, then you have to arm yourself. You have to mentally prepare yourself to defend yourself in order to survive the situation. And that brings us to Virginia Tech. So as I talked to you about Virginia Tech, we know that the attacker was a individual familiar with the building. He went in there with the intent to kill. He had prepared a plan by chaining the door shut because he knew police were coming. So he prevented police from getting in immediately. And he went and visited Norris Hall, which is right here. Older building, so we're talking, stone structure. We're not able as law enforcement to access it very well because it's got these very medieval like wood doors and very difficult to make entry into, so it's going to slow us down. So we're in this setting, and then it's a multiple classroom and a long hallway. Second floor is where this all occurred. The gunman immediately goes in and he will attack the first room. If you want to go ahead and click on this. First room was 206. Goes into 206, and you're talking about no time, no prep for planning, no ability to avoid, no ability to deny. So what do we have to do? We have to defend ourselves. We have to use the masses. The body has to attack the attacker in order to stop the killing. I'm not saying everyone's not going to survive. I'm not saying that you may not get shot, but you have a higher likelihood of survival if you make that active effort and that choice. Remember the young lady spoke about 211? She was in 211, but she's hearing the gunshots going on at 206 and 207. So 211, where the most persons perished, they had the audible, oh, what's going on down the hallway? They had the time, I understand time is relative, but they had a period of time where the gunman was not in the room. So we have to immediately get over that denial and get to that active decision-making phase. 207, gunman goes in, starts shooting individuals, kills those in red, wounds those as yellow, and the greens are uninjured survivors, and then moves to 211, where we heard her testimony. He steps in and immediately goes down the row, shooting individuals one at a time. Visits the classroom 3 times. That's why it has such a high casualty rate. And ends up taking their own life in that room. If you want to go through the 204, this is an amazing story. The professor there was, again, no different than you or I, but decided that he was going to take an active role in the survival of his students. So he used his body to barricade the door shut as the gunman was outside. The gunman shot through the door, killing the professor, and then ultimately made entry. But then during that time, the students were hopping out the window. They were using their avoidance tactic in order to prevent that victimization by lessening the number of people inside the room.
Room 205, you see the X on the door. 205, the students in the room hearing the gunshots going off, barricaded the door by laying on the floor and using their feet to jam the door shut so they couldn't get in. Suspect did fire through the door into the room, but they were all flat down, and he's firing at chest height. Nobody in 205 got injured, and they were able to barricade the door and keep him out of there completely.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was 207, they used the bodies of the deceased to barricade the door, and the rest of them were able to survive because of the loss of life. But it's a tough decision and a tough circumstance to decide whether you'll survive or not. So we're looking at survivability based on action alone. When we see persons take actionable steps to improve their survivability, the numbers go down. Obviously 205 being the best because they denied entry through a very creative way by laying on the ground and not allowing the attacker to get in. That's what the numbers show us. It's obviously a terrible situation, and we are learning from terrible events, but we have to take a very educational look at these situations to see how we can educate those of you on the best solutions and the best actions. Talk about this.
So what happens when we get here? You've already gone through all your avoidance, you're denying. If you have to defend, you have to defend. We show up, hopefully we have some information on where the shooter is or where you are, whatever information you can provide. When we come in contact with you, there's going to be a lot of yelling. Obviously, this is a dynamic situation. Follow the commands. You're probably going to hear, get on the floor, show me your hands. We tell you, show us your hands. It's not like this, okay? I think everybody knows this. We've seen TV enough. We want to see the palms of your hands. We want to see them away from your body. You don't always have to put them up, especially if you're injured, but get them away from your body so that we can clearly see your hands. If we tell you get on the floor, get on the floor. Whatever's there, sorry, we'll deal with it, but we're trying to move as fast as we can, and we're going to talk about this in a second, to either neutralize or stop the killing, and then we're going to transition into treating people. We understand there's going to be injured. We'll work through that. If we tell you get down on the floor, stay there, hands out. Or we tell you get on a wall, put your hands up on the wall, and stay there, okay? Not only is this going to be a life-changing moment for you, it's going to be a life-changing moment for us. Go back to Sandy Hook. Can you imagine going into an elementary school and seeing that? There's going to be a lot of things. We're no different than anybody in this room. There's still going to be a lot of emotion. So just listen, do what we say, and we'll move through it. Now we get into, like I talked about, our priorities in an active attacker incident. First and foremost, and people don't always like to hear this, our first priority is to stop the killing. So we're going to pass by people who are injured. We're going to pass by the people screaming, "I'm shot." It may be you, I hope not, but you might be looking at us going, "I'm shot, I need help." I know that, but if I don't get the person who is still shooting, a lot more people are going to need help. We're going to go deal with them first. And once we get that person stopped and we can stop the active killing, then we're going to transition into what we call stop the dying. And I'll let Justin touch a little bit on that with the TAC medics and how all that's going to work as far as what you might see.
Sure. We practice different tactics within the Frederick County, Maryland area. I'm proud to say that we have very cooperative jurisdictions: the Frederick Police Department, the Frederick County Department of Fire Rescue, and the Frederick County Sheriff's Office, as well as our minor, smaller agencies, Brunswick and Thurmont. We are all going through training we have in the past, and we continue to train together, looking at rescue task force models, which incorporate officers escorting medics into a warm zone and treating individuals inside the structure as we are still dealing with a barricaded individual or an isolated threat in the structure. So we're trying to get medicine in to help people. We're also using an evacuation cordon principle where we're using officers to cover areas that are still of concern to us, but create really a hallway for us to get medicine in and get victims out to our casualty collection points or higher levels of care. So we use a lot of different methods to try and make sure that that stop the dying is addressed as quickly as possible. This is a video, it looks like a phone video of an active threat incident where they're interacting with the police. You'll hear them giving commands. We are trying not to re-victimize you. We understand that you've gone through a terrible situation, but we are just trying to mentally process all the persons that we haven't, we call them unknowns. We don't believe that they are a threat to us, but we haven't actually identified them, made sure they're free of weapons. So we are just going to address everyone and give them direction. It sometimes may come off a little harsh, and we apologize. It's just one of those situations we're trying to manage.
Are you ready? If you're not cool, I'm not walking with you. Sir? Go. You're not going to just keep your hands right with him. You're not all the way there. You're going to make your left knee up and down. Thank you. Try to relax, everyone. Try to relax. I'll take a bullet before you do. That's for damn sure. Just be cool, okay?
So, just as Sergeant Brown said, just try to listen to the direction and follow, and we will make sure that you are going from the location where you were potentially barricaded at, or you avoided to and found yourself, and we will get you through area that we control to a safer place, and that's our goal and our mindset. How many of you are trained in CPR? Very good. How many of you are trained in stop the bleed? Okay, stop the bleed. Very good. Okay, some more hands. Let me submit to you that you are more likely to die from blood loss during one of these incidents than anything else. You're more than likely to succumb to a injury to one of your main arteries than you are to die from a bullet going through your chest and through your lungs. So understand that there is things that you can mitigate very simply through proper training. And I'll let Vince talk about that. That's his area of expertise. And he could talk about stop the bleed training.
I'll actually pop this up here. So the Stop the Bleed program talks about, Sergeant Thomas said, stopping bleeding. There's a variety of ways we can do that. I think everybody's familiar with direct pressure. We can go all the way up to tourniquets. We carry chest seals. All of our officers in the department and the Sheriff's Office, Thurmont, Brunswick, and Frederick County, we go through a curriculum called LEMIC. It's Law Enforcement Emergency Medical Care. Part of that is this training as well. So every police officer that you come across is going to have chest seals, tourniquets. We're going to be able to patch you up until we can get you to a higher level of medical care. It's incumbent upon you as well to be able to take care of yourself. And that's one of the things that we train our officers when we go out and we try to train the public. The Stop the Bleed program is available to anybody. We can do the classes. Actually, Gina Panarella up at Risk Safety is our coordinator for the city, but she's also an EMS lieutenant down at Station 3 in the city. It helps you help yourself, and if you can help yourself, then that's one less person that we have to take care of. And I don't say that in a negative way, but if we have a lot of casualties and you're able to treat yourself until we can get you out of there, then we can devote our attention to some of the other people that may not be able to do that. So think about being able to take care of yourself, and that's pretty much what we've been talking to the whole way through here.
So, yeah, just to make sure that drives home, there's obviously a greater chance you could be hurt in the workplace outside of an active threat incident. So knowing proper training, how to handle yourself, how to wound care another, could be very important in that circumstance. We've talked a lot about an emotional topic here. We've talked a lot about what kind of trauma you can expect and how to process that trauma in the moment. But we recognize that there's a lot of long-lasting effects when it comes to experiencing trauma and being subjected to such an incident. And we would encourage you to understand what your work health insurance program offers you, the resources that you have within your departments, within your agencies to deal with critical incidents outside of work, within work, because that mental trauma is going to take a lot of working through to heal from. It's long lasting, and I'm speaking to the choir. So understand, we recognize that as part of this curriculum that it doesn't stop once the threat stops. Your healing and your processing of this incident is impactful, and it's going to take you seeking out additional help to be able to positively recover from this. We didn't mention any of the names of the shooters because to us, that is not the important aspect of this training. We don't want to give any acknowledgement to the horrific events that they had caused in the lives that they took. We want to contribute, though, a lot of just honor and gratitude toward the people that made the choice to act in these circumstances. And a couple of those are mentioned in the next coming slides. One more time. Victoria here, she was a first grade teacher in Sandy Hook, and she was involved in the shooting. Obviously, she stepped in between the shooter and her elementary school students and gave her life to protect them. So we want to make sure that she's known. Angela McQueen, she was, I believe, a gym teacher, if I'm not mistaken, in her educational establishment. She is fortunately with us today. She recognized an active shooting event inside of her school, and she acted by tackling the gunman and subduing him, obviously saving the lives of many. This is a very emotional training. We are trying to encourage these conversations between you and your employers to rediscuss your emergency plans, to discuss your tactics and your choices within the workplace on how to deal with an interior threat. Yeah, we're all well trained on how to deal with a tornado or severe weather, but what are we doing to prepare ourselves for an internal threat? And you need to have these conversations and to develop these plans. And we can discuss later how to put these plans into training and then to practice them out through scenario development. But we need to start with the groundwork. So we do appreciate you all being here, making sure that you're aware that you take a large role in your own survivability in these situations. And we encourage you to constantly be having these conversations, because that's the only way we're going to get better and be able to have a plan in place in order to deal with these. So avoid, deny, defend are just words. But if we don't take them and put them into policy and we don't practice them, they become just words. So make them actionable choices in an event like this. And I'll leave it to Vince to close us out.
I'd like being the closing act. Excuse me, not a lot to add to Sergeant Thomas here. But like I said, these are things that you have to think about. We don't like to, we don't want to. If I could have gone through my entire career and never had to discuss this, it would be a great day. But again, this is going to sound cliche, but preaching to the choir, you all have dealt with tragic events already that have affected people personally. It's what we do for a living. Take care of yourself, wrap your head around this, make sure that you're there so that the next person that needs your help can get it. Make sure that you're there for somebody else, make sure you're there for your family, for your loved ones, and make sure that you're there for yourself. So take it to heart, personally, professionally, throughout your business, your company, wherever you're coming from, and put this into place so we can all see the next sunrise.
I just again thank you for taking the time. For those of you who are here, thank you for our partners for hosting and for being so willing to open up their facilities. We'll go ahead and we'll end it here, but we'll be available for questions afterward. So thank you.